For those of you who are in my 2070 class, I'm going to rehash some things, and I apologize in advance. I've titled this Making Goals Work, because I think we have a pretty clear joint sense of what we're trying to accomplish with JDC, and this is more or less what it looks like, right? You want to go and come back with hardware. We, as your coaches, as the faculty, we want you to come back with hardware. We want you to make us look really good. The challenge is that we start the term with this kind of vague goal in mind, and we hope that what happens is something like this, that we basically just chip away at it, that we invest more and more effort, and it just continually pays off for us. And that with more work invested over more time, we get better and better results until we ultimately hit a goal of being competition ready. The real challenge, though, is that this is what it looks like in practice. That the effort, the relationship between the work that we're putting in and the effort we're expending and the results we're achieving are sometimes not as tight as we would want them to be. And so what I'd like to do today, and this is the real concern, is it's fine if you get there, but there's a lot of times where it starts to get towards the end of the term and teams still aren't feeling, going weeks before the competition, they're still not feeling ready. And this is where you see teams doing things like ruining their holidays by coming in and doing 5 practices and coming in on Christmas Eve and doing a practice. And so what we want to do is we want, as a group, to move you into this nice linear tight relationship where the more effort that you're putting in, the better the results you're getting, and have some predictability in your life. So what we're going to do today is 3 things. Do we have about an hour? Is that right? About an hour. We're going to have 4 competitors who are going to talk to you about, I think, the bad side of JDC. Who's done JDC before? Okay, so many of you are familiar with this. We're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the ups and downs and probably focusing, honestly, on the downs, the challenges that our teams face as they go from their first week when they're full of enthusiasm and spirit and they're practicing the chants in front of the mirror to late December when the chants in front of the mirror have dropped off a little bit. So they're going to tell you a little bit about the challenges you can expect, the conflicts they've encountered, setbacks they've seen. The big challenge for a lot of teams isn't necessarily the setbacks, it's the plateaus. When you start, you're investing effort, you're going to practice after practice, and it stops feeling like each additional practice is paying off for you. So there's this question of how do we break out of the plateaus. I'll talk to you a little bit about what we know from research on goal setting, and I'll try to apply it here a little bit. We can talk about why groups succeed at collectively setting and pursuing goals, and what some of the real challenges with group goal setting look like, and what they might look like for JDC. And then we'll close, and I'm hoping to spend as much of the time as possible on this one, is spending a little bit of time together in maybe small groups, talking through some practical strategies and tactics that our teams can use this year, starting immediately, to do better and to get that close relationship between the effort you're expending and the payoff that you're getting. So the first thing I'd like to do is invite our panel. This is the realistic, for those of you this is year 1 of JDC. We have 4 experienced competitors, Bryce, Steph, Adam, and Rhea, who will give you their view on the challenges that they faced and the challenges that you might face as you go through the training for JDC. So the ups and downs and maybe a little bit more the downs. So with that, I'll invite you guys to come up. We've got maybe 15, 20 minutes.
You did take it.
So tip number 1, always set them up the way you want it.
You guys missed the handshakes with the row. Docking remarks.
That's okay. So, I guess we're here to discuss some of the challenges that we all face as competitors in the preparation process for JDC West. Obviously, have any of you guys met your whole team yet, or started kind of discussing what your plans are for the year? It's a little early for that.
Okay.
So we'll just do a quick intro of our background, just to kind of get the ball rolling. So I competed on the team for 3 years. My first year I was on the social team, so no academics whatsoever. The second year I was on the tax team with Adam. And this past year I was one of the captains for the team.
My first year I competed on entrepreneurship. My second year I competed on tax and Bryce. So I was there for 2 years.
I did marketing my first year and business strategy my second year.
I did accounting my first year and international business my second year.
Cool. Okay, just to start off, I think from my experience on the tax team, that's maybe a little skewed from what some of you might experience because it's such a technically focused team. You have to study, and you have to study a lot. Like, I think it's probably the most important thing, especially if you're on one of the more technical teams like finance, accounting, tax. Those are things where you can't make it up, right? You either know what the answer is or you don't know what the answer is. So studying, especially with those 3 disciplines, is very important.
Yeah, and kind of to build on that, having done both tax, which is very like right or wrong heavy, versus entrepreneurship, where you really can't be entirely, like you can be wrong, but like you can't really be entirely off based on anything. You need to get to know very early on, like how to get good at the type of team that you're on. If you want a creative team, marketing, business strategy, entrepreneurship, where you need to like develop strategies and kind of think outside the box a little bit, or are you on a team like tax and finance and kind of come together with your team and understand how you're going to take advantage of your own strengths and make sure that you are consistently coming up with creative ideas when you're going into like an entrepreneurship case. If I can speak to my experience a little bit, one thing that I was finding is you'll have periods of time when you're very busy during school and everything's stacking up, you still got case practice. I went to a couple of entrepreneurship practices, like just tired, mentally exhausted, and they were awful.
Tax team.
However, if you know that you as a person, and this is maybe a conversation you should consider having with your team, I need 15 minutes to lay down and close my eyes before I, if I'm tired, before I come up with anything of value. Make sure you're prepared for your practices. So that, for me, that was a way that I prepared for my practices, taking a break and, turning my brain off for a little while before I could come up with anything of substance. Because if you're not, on in your practices, they're not worth it. Your coaches will pick up on it, your team knows. It just makes it a lot more challenging, and you'll start to have a little bit more of that squiggly graph. You're not going to make consistent progress over the course of the year. So the takeaway from that is be prepared for practice.
So, I guess my insight into that is, for me personally, I feel like there's a difference between being prepared and actually knowing what you're doing. And I know, especially right at the start, you guys aren't going to know what you're doing, and that's okay. And even if at the end of the route you don't know what you're doing, as long as the judges don't know that, you're fine. I have, a lot of personal evidence to that you can really say whatever you want in front of them. And as long as you're confident, they'll believe you. So don't be too worried about either not knowing what you're talking about. If it's something more technical like tax, it might not be as easy to get by with it. But as long as you have tied up all your loose ends in your presentation and you and your team are working together and you have that confidence when you're up on the floor, that will set you so much higher than the other teams that maybe have all the technical aspects, but they're just not selling it.
Okay, so tying into what the rest of the panelists have said here, one of my biggest challenges was time management, especially during exam season. There was also a moment of plateau, at least for me, where during practices 6 to 9, let's say, week 6 to week 9, things just didn't seem like they were improving. We were kind of at the same stage. We were getting the same responses. We weren't getting any better, we weren't getting any worse, but that was also because our mind was elsewhere, so we weren't really there during the practice. So again, just like relating it back to what Adam said, like we were sort of prepared, but our hearts weren't in it, and that was evident through our practices because we weren't improving and we weren't not improving. Yeah, so that was one of my biggest challenges. Was certain times I would just go there and I would just be simply doing the action of like being there for a practice because I had to mark it off for that week, but I wasn't actually there, and that showed through our results.
I think a big part of that too is actually taking the feedback you receive from your coaches each week and applying it the following week. So many times I just wrote down what they said and the next week completely forgot about it and didn't apply it, and I think that ties into plateaus a lot, where you keep on doing the same thing over and over, and you can't figure out why you're not improving, and it's because you're not actually taking any of your feedback. So definitely would recommend reviewing that. Doesn't have to be right away. I mean, if you do it right away after your coaches leave with your team, it'll definitely stick in your head better, but reviewing that before your next practice.
Can I ask a question? Is there a trick that you guys use? Because I found last year when we were doing practices, we had so much feedback. Did you have like a top 3 that you would pick on things that you wanted to work on, or would you just try to kind of gear towards one? Like, how would you tackle that?
One strategy you could use, which we tried a little bit on entrepreneurship and probably didn't do as good of a job as we should have on tax, is even before your practice, kind of look at the feedback that you've gotten in previous ones, see if there's any trends, is there anything you're consistently like not doing, and then maybe come up with a list of 2, maybe tops 3 like items that are on that list that are coming up all the time that your coaches are always harping on you about, and be like, these are our goals to do today. We're gonna get this right, we're gonna get this right. And like, it's a practice. So if you're doing a tax case and you've been messing up one calculation consistently, and that calculation doesn't end up being a huge component of the case that you're doing, focus on it anyway. Maybe you miss a key issue, but you can redo the case again later. As long as you figure out how you're gonna apply this one piece of feedback into one case and do it properly once, you'll start to see it become easier as you apply it further, like as you go on in future practices. So prioritize things that you think you need to focus on that your coaches have been giving to you, and then just take practice, make it your goal to make sure you do that well.
We actually did that last year for every practice. We would pick our top 3 goals based on feedback and actually email it to our coaches and say, like, these are the 3 things we're focusing on, just so that they're not, harping on us for other things. We're doing bad in something else that wasn't one of our goals, so it's fine. So it's not fine. It's okay.
What our team did this past year, and I think we did a little bit the year before as well, was when we got feedback, we would kind of just like briefly skim over it. We didn't want to spend any time longer than we were already there, because often it would be late at night. And we'd sort of just like look over it, and then each of us kind of knew what the coaches were harping us, like what they were saying about us. Like that was sort of a common thread, and so we'd make a mental note. But then the following week practice, we'd always come half an hour early, and then we'd like look through that feedback and see, okay, well today let's sort of like let's not have so many ums in your thing. And so during the week I'd like think of like basic statements that obviously your content is going to be different, but I really struggled with like placing those words together, especially when I'm under pressure. I use a lot of crutch words. So like I made a mental note to like sort of look through ahead of time, and then made a mental note for the practice.
A little more ambient.
I think I leaned my shoe.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm not sure how to fix it.
One thing that I think, this is a little past Carter's question already, but when you're in resolution, it can be very overwhelming once you've gone through the case with your team and you're trying to think of all the issues and all the things that you're going to have to tackle. It's very overwhelming. So and I think CPA has really reinforced this to me, is you need a systematic approach. So think of what your highest priorities are, what you want to tackle first, and sort of work your way down the list. Because there's going to be so many things. There's going to be red herrings. There's going to be small issues, key issues. You want to make sure that you hit the key issues and the biggest issues, and also hit any issues that are sort of a prerequisite for another issue, right? If there's issue X and issue Y is dependent on that, you need to obviously take care of issue X first. So just having the sort of process flow of how you're gonna tackle it. And then try to standardize that for your team as much as possible, because I think that was one of our biggest problems in tax. Every time we just treated it as a totally new thing, and we didn't have a real backbone approach that we could fall back on to sort of plug in what we needed to do, and so that wasted a lot of time for us. I think especially at JDC West at the competition, that soaked up maybe half an hour. We were just trying to figure out what the issue was.
Well, it
Because
wasn't
the
a
case-
case, so.
Yeah, the case was very, it was very strange from our experience anyways, so.
And you'll get good at reading cases, but you'll definitely find like common elements, like if CEO is of position X and wants to do initiative X, like 8 times out of 10 it's a horrible idea. And like, you'll start to pick up on things like that and just understand, like, after seeing lots and lots of cases, there are very common elements that will flow through all of them, and if you can identify those consistently, you'll be able to identify these key issues, you know, right off the bat, and don't just do the easy issues first, do the important issues first, because you can spend that extra 5 minutes at the end of a presentation that you just need to fill time chatting about the one thing that you didn't talk about, because you know it's easy about.
That's
You guys to comment briefly, because we've heard a bit about the sort of the technical core of the cases and the exhaustion and the late practices and the fire hose of feedback from the judges. What are the dynamics within your team? How do you guys haven't in many cases met your team members yet. How do you manage the relationships and get sort of a high performing team, or what are the challenges there?
I think a big part of it is communicating your strengths at the beginning, and gaining that trust with your teammates that this is something you're comfortable doing. And of course, that will come out as you guys start practicing what you're more comfortable with. And I definitely recommend trying a little bit of everything. One person starts the intro every week. You don't want to start off that way. And I think at the beginning of the year, it's really good to bond with your team, however that may be. So probably outside of practices, outside of classes. But I think just gaining that foundation of your relationship, friendship at the beginning is a huge help moving forward.
Yeah, you'll end up when you're in your resolution, butting heads over ideas and things that you guys are proposing. And it makes it a lot easier to, for me to tell Brianne, no, you're wrong. Oh, mostly for Brianne to tell me, no, I'm wrong. About things, if you're comfortable with them. If you're hesitant to, take a strong position on someone with another person that you don't know very well, you're not going to be able to, you're going to have all these ideas in your head that you can't actually put it on the floor, and someone might have valuable information that they're afraid to put out because they're concerned about how the other person's going to take it. So yeah, to build on Steph's point, definitely developing those relationships with your team. You'll become really close anyway, so it might as well just be a friendly relationship from the beginning.
I'd say 2 quick things. Don't take any criticism personally, especially from your judges or coaches, whatever you want to call them, because they're going to rip you up a lot of times, and some of them are not so nice and some of them are nice, but don't take it personally. They, on the whole, are quite technically sound and they know somewhat of what they're talking about. With that said, sometimes people will say an idea and other judges will disagree as well, so you can see that it's a very real life sort of situation, because in the real world, not everyone's going to agree on the same idea, and you get to see all those different points of views. And at competition, judges might have different ideas as well, so that's something to remember, and that's just something that you're going to need to work on and work through. My other point that I want to make was expectations. I think it's really important to set expectations and goals with your team, kind of what Dr. Neville was talking about at the beginning, goals. And we all kind of have the goal of bringing home the hardware, but just it's important to sit down with your 3-person team, talk about what you expect from each other, keep each other accountable, like Sonia was saying, and just have open communication amongst yourselves.
Do you mind if I use that as a bit of a segue? Because I've got this goal slide that I want to bring up. Because I know I mentioned, flippantly, the goal is easy, the goal is hardware. But there's a lot more to it, right? So this is my reminder of 2070. Who was in my 2070 class? One. Okay, the rest of you were spared this. But this is like how we like to think the world works, that if you just have goals, you perform, it'll motivate you. But the challenge is it's only specific types of goals that actually have that effect. And so, you'll get together with your team really early on, and you'll have this conversation where everyone like swears up and down that they're in it to win it, right? But that alone is not going to be enough, because you need specific, you need a hard goal, you need a difficult, ambitious goal, but it also has to be specific. It has to be and remain important to you. We're going to get back to the remaining important, because it's easy in September or even in August to say that this is going to be really important. And as you guys are talking about, like once you're burdened with a bunch of other exams, when you've got a whole bunch of other things on your plate, there's this question of how to maintain this as a priority. So the reality of goal setting is that it moves through behaviors, right? Goals only work in so much as they unlock a set of behaviors that are, sort of performance enhancing. So people, when they have these goals and when they agree on them, they work with purpose and they put in more effort. And this is the key one. They persist. Things that you get a bad case, you get terrible feedback from your judges, you get one of those nights where you're like not really firing on all cylinders. I think Steph, you were talking about that. And the question is, do you persist? And more importantly, do you try new strategies? Do you sort of try to chip away at it by adapting what you're doing? And unfortunately, even that isn't enough. So the model is like, goals, well, they unlock certain behaviors, but they only unlock those behaviors in particular contexts. So there's a bunch of conditions that are necessary for your goals to actually translate to the kinds of behaviors you're looking for. And I think the number one piece, and this, I'm going to get back to this because it's a judging responsibility as much of it as a team responsibility, is useful feedback. You need to know at every stage, and this is where the plateau problem kicks in. How do you see how your effort is unlocking progress, right? If you can't see that another 5 hours spent in tax prep is actually going to translate to a better practice next time, or a solution to a recurring problem, it's difficult to want to invest the time, particularly when it's you've got other priorities. So you have to know where you stand. You have to have a sense at every moment in the term of how much progress you've made and what the key areas that are left look like. And there has to be, lastly, a sense, and this is easy to say and hard to maintain, a sense that you are capable of doing this. And I think, once again, judges are implicated in this. You go into isolation and you're spending all this time on case resolution. You've never seen these cases before. They're challenging. A lot of your coaches, me included, will give you progressively more difficult cases. So it actually feels like you're moving backwards because you're getting worse at it from week to week. So there's this question of how do you maintain a sense in your team that you're capable of getting this done? And so this is part of the sense of not only knowing what still is required of you, but tracking where you've been. So this is a complicated picture of how goals make a difference. In some ways, it threatens the tidy view of the model where if we all agree we want hardware, we'll get there, because there's a lot of intervening stuff. And that's made even more complicated when we get the teams involved, right? So this is one of my favorite pieces of sculpture because it captures how teamwork works. Everyone's in the same boat together and they're rowing in opposite directions. And so all the things we talked about, what characteristics do good goals need? It's complicated when you've got a team involved because they have to be shared. You have to arrive at them together and there has to be a commitment. So early on, I think a lot of the teams have these kinds of early meetings where they make really genuine commitments to each other. But the challenge is it's very easy in those meetings, especially if you're with someone who's really enthusiastic and someone who's really charismatic, to nod and go along with things. And it's easy to tell people no late in the term when you've got the trust and you spent time socializing and you know each other. And it's hard in meeting one to push back on people who have different levels of commitment or different views about where they're going or how they'll get there. The last piece, so it's got to be shared, it's got to be mutually committed. The last piece is that the commitments have to be at the same level. I think this is going to be the hardest thing in JDC because you're all committed to JDC, but you also all have commitments to student government, to courses, to jobs, to co-op. There's a whole bunch of commitments that you have elsewhere. And in November and December, when you're heading into final papers and exams, something will have to give, right? And that's something, maybe your social life, it may be sleep, it may be work, but if the commitment level that you have in your team is at different levels, you're gonna have some fraying of those teams. And so there has to be a question of, as you're setting these goals and as you're revisiting these goals, how sort of robust are they to the differences in levels of commitment? The behaviors change too. And this is, I think, one of the good pieces of having to do these things in teams, is that you actually unlock a bunch of resources that you don't have individually, right? You can work together, you can coach and support one another. And I've seen, working with a few, I was in not-for-profit, working with a few not-for-profit teams, there were real differences in the degree to which the teams were sort of attending to their own business. Like, I introduce, and that's my job, and everyone else can take care of their job. And in the better teams, they were kind of each other's coaches. So they were viewing the need for improvement in another person's performance as their own job. And if you can get that, it's really, really powerful. And so I think one of the things that you have to think about, especially because you're going to be faced down by judges who are often, at best grumpy, at worst awful to you, they're shredding your ideas apart, is how do you build in a reward system? How do you build in encouragement and positive feedback and a sense that you're sharing with each other progress and that you're encouraging each other and encouraging each other's development. And so I think that's something that has to happen, but it's one of the things that is really nice about teams. Last piece before we move on to JDC application is the conditions change a little when you're working with teams. One of the challenges, and it's true of JDC, it's true of other things, is that there's this problem of free riding, right? If there's one person in your team who, in November, decides that their exams are a little bit more important than another JDC practice and starts to back out, then the relationship, the nice tight-knit relationship between the more effort I invest, the better the outcome, starts to come apart, right? If you invest tons of effort, it's not improving your team's performance unless everyone's investing the same level of effort. And so this is where things start to come apart. And the usual fix, like the GMGT 2070 when you're in a group project fix, is just to do all the work yourself. But JDC punishes that, right? And JDC judges punish that. If you have someone who opens and closes and takes every one of the tough questions from the judges, you're seen as an imbalanced team and you pay for it. So there's a degree to which you are in a true team, like a real interdependent team. And you can't just fill in other people's lack of commitment with your own effort. So it has to be addressed and addressed early and revisited. So I want to give you an application of some of this. I want to think about my own role. And so I'll give you the example of judging. I think our judging, I don't want to speak for other judges. We have some wonderful judges, coaches. My coaching, I realize in retrospect, thinking about this little model of like how we unlock performance is lousy. Because what I do is and my team of coaches does every week, is we give a massive fire hose of feedback. We have this like big long list, and you wrap up your presentation at like 9:30, and then for an hour we just go through the list, right? Like, oh yeah, and on slide number 17, I didn't like the placement of this, and by the way, you mumble and you jingle your change, and I don't like your strategy. And so we give this kind of fire hose of feedback. The other thing that, and I've tried to wean myself off of this, but I see a lot of coaches still doing this, is giving really narrow case-specific feedback. They're like relitigating the case. Like, here's the problem with your solution. Here's what I would have done. And that's valuable if it gives you some feedback that you can use in the next round and the round after that, or if you're going to redo the case. But we spend a lot of time, I think, as coaches, basically just wasting our time and yours telling you what we would have done differently in your solution instead of giving you guidance about the next case you're going to face. The other challenge that we have is that we'll often give you a laundry list of problems. You don't have a really good dynamic, You're not building off of each other, and that's the feedback. And we don't give you an idea of what is the action plan to fix that, and we leave it with you. I think a lot of coaches don't do a great job of telling you what their priorities are. You know, knowing that you have limited time, what should you be spending 80% of your time on, and what should you be spending 20% of your time on? And so, like, there are coaches, and I'm sort of one of these, who are counters. Like, I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna count every time you say or ah. And yes, ums and ahs are bad in presentations, but the question is ums or ahs where you should be investing your effort, right? And maybe it is, but we don't often step back and say, you have limited time, where are you spending your effort? We have competing ideas. I don't know, has anyone been in a JDC resolution with more than 3 judges in the room? More than 4? More than 5? Oh God, yeah, so you're getting the idea. You'll get, the deluge of feedback, but you'll often get competing feedback. One person loves your strategy, one person hates your strategy, and so you're left kind of adrift. And then the last one, I think this is the most important, is that we don't, at least I don't have as a coach, a good cycle set up of feedback, specific changes, and then feedback on the changes that have been made. Like, do it, I'll give you feedback, do it again, I'll give you feedback on the same thing, and we'll track whether there's progress. And so I think when you have this kind of coaching, it breaks the cycle, right? Like, it breaks the link between goals and behaviors, because you don't know what works, you don't know how to change, you as a team might not be consistent in changing together, and you're probably not helping each other. Like, teams don't often go, okay, you're saying and ah a lot, what can we do as your teammates to help you with that? It's like everyone gets kind of left on their own. This leads to, thinking about the conditions, kind of often an uneven burden. And you have some people who walk away feeling like they're worse than their teammates, they feel like they're dragging down their team, or on the flip side, they feel they're burdened by their team, and there's a sense of we see our problems as our own problems instead of our team's problems. We start to lose track of the payoff. We don't see how the extra effort we're investing is paying off for us. We don't know where we stand in the term. We don't see how, with 5 more practices, we're going to be in JDC ready condition. And we start to erode the sense that we're capable and good at it, and we're going to be able to make a go of it. And so I think, this is one little piece of the overall JDC practice structure is coaching, but you have this element of the just taken for granted process, and it creates this break in how we achieve our goals. And so I think there's a whole bunch of other things that happen in JDC in the training process that we need to step back and think about. What are our processes? How do we plan our time over the term? What do we do with our time in practice? What do we do with our time in resolution? What's our model for collaborating with our teammates? What do we do outside of practice? And Bryce has got it. In a lot of disciplines, it's study. But how do we study? How do we study as a team? How do we help each other as teammates so that we function as a more cohesive, collective entity instead of just a couple of individual parts? And then the last thing that we don't really talk about is how do you work with the other teams? And I think there's been a lot of progress made here. Like, in the last few years, it went from every team practiced entirely by themselves and saw only their coach, and that was kind of it, to the exec is in the room, the godparents are in the room, past competitors are in the room, teams are watching each other's practices, teams are giving each other feedback on structure. All of those things have improved, but we need to think about what kind of processes we can put into place to do a better job of all of these things. So what I want to do with, I think we have the room till 8, but we can spend as much time as you guys are willing to commit. I'd like you to get into sort of manageable groups, like 4 or 5 people. Maybe you guys would be willing to each take one group and kind of lead. And I'd like you to identify 2, absolute maximum 3 processes or routines that you would like to see the teams take that would allow them to perform better, that would allow them to take all the September enthusiasm and carry it forward into January, that would allow them to keep on sort of a nice linear, like effort payoff kind of ratio instead of the ups and downs. And when you do that, so I'll give you an example, you want to ask yourself, what's it going to take to get the buy-in of the team members? Like, what do you need to get people committed to this? What are you going to require out of your coaches? I know in the coaching guide it says, like, they're volunteers, be nice to them, but that doesn't mean you can't ask things of them. And I think you should be asking a lot out of your coaches and giving them feedback on how they can help you better. You need to think about, I know your poor exec and your poor co-captains, but what do they need to provide you to make it work better for you? And then lastly, what are you going to do to show that it's working, to monitor your progress, measure results, and then change if need be? So I'll give you the example of coaching, because it's my area. If I think one of the things we need to do better is focused coaching, actionable coaching, then what we'll need is from the teams a structure for recording feedback, planning to respond to it, and then acting on it. And so when you were talking about, we get together for half an hour before our practice and we identify our key action areas, that's a kind of process that would allow even a scattered judge to be useful to you, because you can start to figure out what you're going to act on. The coaches, though, they need something too. They need a structure for A, consolidating their feedback so they don't go 5 judges or 5 coaches, one after another, sending you on different directions. So how do they integrate their thoughts, and then how do they give you structured feedback that's focused and that's actionable? In terms of resources that you would need from the exec, what can we give coaches in terms of training, expectations, support? Do we need to create some specialist coaches that move from team to team to give feedback in particular areas? You can think about there may be resources that are required from the exec. And then lastly, we want to think about what do we do to monitor progress? So for me, I think you've got the right idea, let's have 30 minutes, let's plan what we're going to do differently, but then there needs to be a way of closing that loop and saying, what were we planning to do differently? How did we do on that? What still needs to be done? And that'll mean that even as your coaches are giving you worse and worse and harder cases, you don't lose track of the fact that you're making progress, because you can see how you've lined things up and then struck them down. And then lastly, you want to think about what do we do if that starts to go off the rails? What if we do if we're getting judges who are coaches rather, who are sort of going off in different directions and they're not being adequately focused, or that we've got recurring problems that we just haven't been able to solve. Like, what's the point at which extra unplanned action is necessary? What's your trigger for that? So that's my example of, I think a success factor here for teams to really perform well is going to be focused coaching. And focused coaching is going to require work out of just about everyone involved in JDC. And it's going to require a set of structures. So I'd like you to identify maybe 2 other things, other than focused coaching, that you think would be difference makers for you and your teams. Is that reasonably clear? And so we've got, I think, some paper and markers. And so if you can sort of build a little grid like that, so that you can, at the end of this, I'll preview this. We won't let the good ideas die in the room. You'll hand them to the exec, and hopefully they'll become action items. They'll be shared with teams, and we'll make some actual progress with these things. So, questions before we get going? Okay.